Good morning, I'm Dr. Rahman, and this is Today's Woman's Health. I have the honor of being with a very special guest, Simi Moore. Simi Moore is a individual, couple, and a sex therapist, and we're here to discuss Black love and sexual dysfunction. Good morning.
Good morning.
How are you today?
Really good.
You are a sex therapist.
Mm-hmm.
Tell me about your training.
So, I actually got my undergrad from Howard University in psychology. And interestingly enough, I originally, when I first started out, I wanted to go straight into being a psychologist and work with depression and really focusing in on destigmatizing mental illness and just overall mental health in the Black community, especially because I've seen how it was treated in my own family and in my own neighborhood and community. And so in undergrad, I started taking on a lot of research activities or being a research assistant. So I ended up working at the National Institute of Mental Health, and then I also did NIMH Core, which is just a program that was run through Howard, and then I also did a summer at the University of Miami. What stood out to me though was at the National Institute of Mental Health, I was actually working with Dr. Zarati, and I was assisting them with people who had severe depression. And while I was there, I had one of the people on the unit came in because we do rounds. So every week we sit in and we have everybody who's on this clinical trial come in and just check in with us. And one day there was this person who came in and just told this story of so much pain. It like engulfed the room of how they've been struggling with depression for a very, very long time, of how today was like the anniversary of them trying to commit suicide, that their own child had committed suicide, and that one of their parents had a successful suicide. And one of the things that I took away from that, other than the fact that that was so much that in fact everybody after that person left had to take a moment to collect themselves before the next person came in. But what struck me is this person is on the unit, they're the ones with severe clinical depression, and yet they spent all of their time talking about everyone else. And
I'm sorry, say that again.
They spent all of their time, all of their check-in, talking about everyone else. So yes,
their child that committed suicide, their parents that they didn't talk about.
Even in their, all of the things that they were talking about of how they felt were all in relation to other people.
Gotcha.
This is so difficult for me because I tried to commit suicide on the anniversary of someone else's successful suicide.
Yes.
I'm sure that me being here is hurting my family and my husband, and they'd all be better off without me. And it was kind of just in that moment that I realized, I don't think that focusing on just the individual is doing anyone justice. So that's when I switched and I was like, you know what, I don't think I want to be a psychologist. I think I want to be a marriage and family therapist or couple and family therapist. And that switch was just because MFTs are systemic. People don't exist in a vacuum. We are
MFTs?
Marriage and family therapists.
Okay.
People don't exist in a vacuum, and therefore I shouldn't treat you like you're this lonely island. I should treat you by looking at you and then all of the relationships you have with everyone else. And then in making that switch over, I also realized that I love working with depression, especially because I know so many people who actually deal with it. And in full transparency, I've actually dealt with it myself. But it's so heavy when you have a full caseload with people who are suffering with severe depression. And as I was talking to my sister about this, she had actually wanted to be a sex therapist when she was in college. So I looked into it and I was like, oh, I can do this. Like, this is great. And as I was thinking about it, if I want to be a systemic therapist and I actually enjoy working with couples, or I want to work with couples in the future, how on earth can you work with a couple and not talk about sex lives? So then it became not only do I want to be a couples therapist, not only do I want to be an MFT, I want to make sure that I am doing it so that when people leave me, they feel good about their relationships. There's nothing under the rug that I didn't touch, and I'm not leaving an aspect of the relationship not solved. And that was kind of my push to go into sex therapy, especially because it was also kind of lacking. And so I looked for a place where I could do that, and I found Jefferson, which is the only place in the States, or at least it was when I came. There may be a new one now, but it is the only accredited place that has a master's program in marriage and family therapy with a concentration in sex therapy. And I'm like, that's where I'm going to be.
Interesting. So your decision to go into sex therapy had to do with the fact that you wanted to deal with a person and their relationships.
Mm-hmm.
And you felt as though the sex relationship was not well explored for most people.
Sort of. My decision to be an MFT was I wanted to look at people in their relationships, because I didn't think that I would be doing you justice if I didn't. Because that's what you're thinking. You're sitting in my chair, but you're thinking about, how does this affect my husband? How does this affect my wife? How does this affect my kid?
Now, you saw it with that one patient, but you felt that's true for
all
of your patients.
It was all of them. They all came in and said this. It was just that particular person. That person was just having a really hard time. Like, hers was just the best example of it. But everybody came in and said that. And so the idea of, well, if I'm gonna focus on relationships, I can't leave this out. And I don't see other programs that are putting it in there like they should. And that just didn't make sense to me. My whole idea is, if you're gonna do it fully, you know?
So is your practice currently limited to sex therapy, or does it include more than that?
Oh, it includes more. So I work with couples, I work with individuals, so those are adults, and it's whether it be sexual issues, or I still do depression, because that is still something that I am interested in. It's just not my full caseload. And I also see a little bit of people for anxiety. I would say that right now I have couples, I have sex therapy, anxiety, depression, and phase of life, and kind of what I'm going to be cultivating, because right now I'm actually full, I'm at capacity, so I have a waiting list, but what I love focusing on is sex therapy, couple work in general from any old issue, depression, and phase of life.
So you shared with me earlier that you started your own business not too long ago. Can you take us through how that happened?
Sure. Oh, and I apologize, I forgot one last piece. After Jefferson, I realized I want to know more sex stuff. So I am actually getting my PhD at the second accredited place in the U.S. There's only 2, which again shows you just how much we're not really getting into this like we should, but it's California Institute of Integral Studies, and I'm getting my PhD in human sexuality.
Fantastic.
Starting my own practice. One, just as a complete and utter side note, if you want to start a business, I would say maybe don't do it during a national quarantine. But in actuality, I was working at another local practice that is amazing, and I loved it there, but unfortunately when COVID hit, they lost half of their business, and so they had to make some really tough decisions, and I was let go, simply because they just couldn't afford for everyone, and overnight, half of the business pretty much just canceled. They stopped coming because in the beginning we didn't know how long COVID would last. So a lot of people were thinking, oh, it's okay, I'm only going to miss a week or 2 or a month, we'll be back. Several months later, people have actually realized and started coming back. But in the meantime, in between time, after that happened, my first thought was, well, I have always wanted to have my own practice, and not just my own practice, but a business that really puts in the forefront of loving, caring relationships that include happy sex lives, that aren't stigmatized. Sex isn't a dirty thing, it's just a thing that people do, and it can be with love, or can it be just pleasure? It can be all of those things. And so I figured, well, now's the time. Everybody's at home, so I have plenty of time to do so, and I went for it. It was difficult in that because it was quarantine and because there were so many things that were uncertain, I actually had to go back and forth with getting my private practice, like with getting my LLC, simply because the actual office wasn't open, and that was a bit of a hassle. And then again, because everything else was shut down, I had so many questions about what's the right paperwork to make sure that I'm filing things. I have no idea how to find an accountant. Fun things that I learned that make no sense to me is apparently you need about 5 different tax ID numbers. So it was just a bit of a learning curve of figuring all of that part out.
And now you're at capacity?
Capacity with a wait list.
How did that happen?
A few different things, and I will quote my super Southern Christian mom, who will say that, tells me all the time that God is good, so I'm pretty sure that he had something to do with that. But I listed myself on Therapy for Black Girls, who is actually, I believe she's a psychologist in Atlanta, ironically. So she started Therapy for Black Girls, which is a directory of Black clinicians. So I'm on there. One, I wanted to make sure that I was supporting another Black clinician because, God willing, one day I will also be up there, and I would like somebody to be supporting me as well. It's also a space where I know that people who, unfortunately, due to the civil unrest, which has become really prominent because of racial injustice, there are some people who are specifically wanting to talk about those things, and they recognize that not every clinician is competent in it, and so it just seems easier to go with somebody who may have a similar experience. So some people are directly looking for Black clinicians because they have these feelings, and they want to make sure that they can share them with somebody who will be able to relate or understand. So I made sure that I was on there, and then I am also on Psychology Today, which is kind of like the go-to one. Everybody's on that one. I'm also on a few other different platforms as well. Clinicians of Color is coming up. Again, I'm going to be on there too. I think I'm also on Care Dash and Open Path.
So people find you by searching online?
Through all of these directory sites. I'll also admit that I have quite a few people who just were previous clients from when I was working at other agencies, and they just Googled me, and that also makes me feel really good, because it means that the work that we did before, the relationship that we built, you found valuable enough to where you search for me. And some people who have come back are people that I actually saw when I was interning at Jefferson. So that's at least
fantastic.
4 years ago.
Sure. Is it hard to find an African American therapist, or what is the disconnect? Because there does seem to be a disconnect between I can't seem to find anyone.
So I will say, prior to this year, like prior to the civil unrest, it probably was a little bit more difficult to find them. So yes, we are on Psychology Today, but I hadn't heard of things like Therapy for Black Girls. Clinicians of Color is brand new. I'm not even sure. I think they just launched in October. So like being able to find one specifically, you kind of just had to go to the regular directories and then just search through. And then the other toughie is, I tell people that you should treat therapy, or you should treat therapists just like you would treat any other service, right? So while you don't just want somebody who has the education, you want somebody that you like and trust. So you shop around. So just because you happen to find a few different Black therapists or Black clinicians doesn't mean you mesh with that person. So it could also be that maybe they're finding these people, but they're either not they just don't connect with them on some level or another, or they're not specializing or doing the work that they particularly want. So finding a black sex therapist, much smaller pool than finding just a black therapist.
Sure.
And then finding a therapist is a much bigger pool than finding a black therapist specifically.
So the other thing that I've been told is that most therapists will not accept insurances. Is that true?
It is. In fact, when I first started doing outpatient, where you just come in for an hour and you leave. I've had supervisors flat out tell me that if you do this long enough and you're good at it, you're going to leave insurance. And it stinks, but because it makes it harder for people to actually get seen if you don't have that out of pocket. But from what I gather from people who have taken insurance and then stopped, it's more of just that the insurance company kind of makes it difficult to do the service in the way that you feel is appropriate. So in particular, usually your insurance is going to want you to have a diagnosis the day of. Now that makes perfect sense if you're like a medical professional dealing with the body, because I'm looking at your body, I can tell you what it is because I'm looking at it, right? That doesn't really happen with mental health. I can chat with you for an hour, but I actually feel very uncomfortable about diagnosing you when I met you an hour ago. So that's something that if you wanted your insurance to pay out, though, I would have to put it there the day that I meet with you. And then, of course, I can change it later on. But now that's in your record that this is what it is. Now, granted, records don't really go anywhere to just the insurance company. But some people feel prickly about that and aren't very fond of it. Personally, my evaluation usually lasts 3 to 4 sessions. And I'm pulling apart a whole bunch of history and information. How do you try to solve this? What do you think the issue is? What does he or she think the issue is, or they think the issue is? And then I'm coming up with a diagnosis, and even then I'm still saying at the end, this is a working diagnosis. So from the evaluation of 3 to 4 sessions, this is what I think it is, but as we move forward, if it changes, I will let you know. They also usually want you to write notes same day. But if you're a clinician, usually I'm working around other people. My last appointment is at 8. So if you need to write all of your notes at the end of the day before 12, that means at 9 o'clock at night I'm writing all of my notes. So some people don't like that as well. And from what I gather, it's different for each insurance company. They make it a little bit harder for you to actually get things done. They also have a specific way to do things that may not go well for every clinician. And then, of course, there's also the hassle of fees and getting paid. So, of course, if you have insurance, there's always the potential for it to lapse, which stinks for you, of course, but it also stinks for the person on the other side, because when I put that in, because I'm guessing they're checking this monthly, because I've never actually taken insurance, but I've heard from other clinicians that they've put in for these things, and then at the end of the month, when they're supposed to actually be getting all the money, it'll say, oh, sorry, this person's coverage actually ended on the 16th, so now you have to talk to them about money, and we're not going to pay for any of that. So either it puts the clinician in this weird space and the client, because now you have this big bill that you weren't expecting, and that may come in between the relationship that we have.
So is there any recourse for someone who doesn't have the money? Someone that may have gotten furloughed, or someone who's unemployed, or someone who feels the need for help but doesn't have, I don't know what the going rate is for a therapist, but whatever that hourly rate is, they don't have resources. What would you say to that person?
So, 2 things. 1, if you do have insurance, you most certainly can just look through your insurance provider and specifically pick from that pool. So whenever people call me and they say that they'd like to do insurance, the first thing I say is, go to your insurance card, flip over the back, call that number, say, I want a therapist or a mental health professional that's near me, send me a list. and then you can call everybody on that list. Now, of course, it's an insurance company, so they're notoriously known for having people on there who no longer are actually being covered. So call and check in with those people, which you should be doing anyway because you want to shop around and make sure you trust that person. Another way to do that, some of the insurance carriers have gotten like super savvy, so they have apps. So you don't even have to call in. You can just go on your app or the website and log in and put in find a provider and put that you want a mental health provider. And again, you'll get that list and you can look through. And then you will know that they're actually within network. You could also just go ahead and see a provider who's out of network. You just, again, have to check in with your insurance company and say, what is my out of network reimbursement rate? And so anybody who's a licensed clinician can give you a receipt with your diagnoses on it, because again, that's what the insurance company wants. You can take that back to your insurance company and they will reimburse you at whatever your out-of-network reimbursement rate is. So let's say my fee right now is $100 and your reimbursement rate is at 50%. Well, that means when I give you this receipt, you can go back to your insurance provider, you're going to get that $50 back. For some people, $50, $40 around there may actually be your copay. So you might be down the middle. Mm-hmm.
So you, if I'm hearing you correctly, you're saying you will work with people that have insurance. You'll give them a bill, so to speak, and then they can submit it to their insurance, and their insurance will pay them whatever their allowable amount is.
Mm-hmm.
But they have to pay you up front.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. That's better than most.
Well, and there are lots of options. So that's just the options. If you are surefire, I definitely want to use my insurance. If you don't, or if you're somebody who doesn't have insurance at all, there's a whole bunch of other options. Specifically because, again, unfortunately, the time period that we're in, lots of people are losing jobs, and jobs are tied to healthcare. So people have gotten really innovative. So I'm on an Open Path, which is another directory where you can find clinicians. And this one is specifically to make sure that people who may not have access to therapy can get it. So my listing on Open Path is free. Every clinician in there is free. I don't have to pay to put myself on there. But the requirement is that I accept at least one low-fee client per month. So low fee can be anywhere from $50 to, I think it can't be over $90. So I think my lowest fee is $70. I never go below $70. And then so you can go to directories like that and find somebody who is willing to do a low fee for you. From my experience, most clinicians do have low fee slots. They're limited, but most people have around anywhere from 3 to 5 spots where they will do their lowest fee. And so you can also get in through that and using directories like that.
That's fantastic. That's called Open Pathways?
Open Path. Mm-hmm.
Open Path. All right. We spent a lot of time talking about the business and finance, but that's absolutely critical because our healthcare is structured that it costs us to get healthcare. And so knowing that there are options is the first step into healing. So, but we're here to talk about Black love. So, what's your concept of Black love? It's a term that we hear a lot of. What does that mean to you, or does it have any special meaning for you?
It has a lot of special meaning. So, just like how I originally was like, I want to be a psychologist, or I want to go into psychology way back when I first started going to Howard in undergrad. The whole idea was I want to embark upon this because I want to change the way my community deals with and looks at mental health. When it switched over, or when it kind of grew into this, I actually want to look at relationships, and a big part of relationships is sexual health as well. Well, then I started looking for that because, originally when I was a research assistant, I was really interested in depression, which means I'm super familiar with looking at a whole bunch of research studies and pulling them apart. So the very first thing I did was do that. I looked for sexual health and relationship and love and all of these concepts in various different studies and research or journals rather. And what I found is I didn't actually see much about Black people, people of color in general, like minorities, period.
In terms of sexual health?
In terms of relationship health or sexual health.
Okay.
Very few. Actually, I don't think at the time I didn't see anything on relationships. And for sexual health, if I were to type it in, what I got was a very STI focused.
STI meaning sexually transmitted infections.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
And that's pretty much all there was. Oh no, how can we make sure that people of color and minorities aren't having sex and giving STIs? And why is this happening? All very negative framed or absent, one or the other. And it really went into, okay, I want to make sure, I want to change that tone as well. So then a big part of what I want my practice to do is to be able to change that narrative. And kind of the idea of Black love coincides very much with what I want to do with my company, Psychsicle, which is I want Black love to be a positive thing. Yes. I want relationships and sexual health to be a positive thing in our community. And I don't want it to be absent in the literature. I don't want it to be absent in journals. I don't want it to be absent in classrooms. I don't want to be that last 2 paragraphs in this one chapter of the book that people are reading about when clinicians are coming up to learn about relationships and to be an MFT or to be a clinician. We're more than that chapter. So I think Black love it's kind of the resurgence of healthy relationships in the Black community, and gaining back something that for some reason, well, not even for some reason, unfortunately, the U.S. has a very sordid racial past, but gaining back something that I feel like we lost.
Yes, historically, Black families were pulled apart. We know that. Black families were pulled apart. So whenever you see a Black man and a Black woman coming together, that's a celebration. And there's so many negatives that have been put out there. I mean, there's a show on Oprah Network called Black Love. And it's of couples that have come together to say that we've had our ups and downs, but we're committed to being in a loving relationship. And what happens is a variety of couples get interviewed about their experiences and their journeys, which is a beautiful thing. And it was started by a woman who said that she was working under the premise that it's hard. It's hard for Black people to get together, you know, and Black women have such a hard time finding a partner. And if you're an educated Black woman, you're more likely to be struck by lightning and all these kind of negative things. And so her and her husband decided they wanted to portray something positive. Now we've all heard about, you know, Ruby Dee and Ossie Davis, and there's Michelle and Barack Obama, and those were examples that no, Black love exists. And I think in our personal lives, we probably have people who we know that they have been loving relationships, parents, aunts, and uncles, who don't necessarily make the newspaper, but we see through them Black love. And that's not to say that there are other kind of loves, and you can love whoever you want to love, and there's nothing wrong with that. But I do think that there is something special about Black love.
Right, and I wholeheartedly agree with that. Most certainly, love is love, so I would never negate that.
We're not trying to be dismissive of
right.
anyone or anyone's choice.
Right.
Yes.
So, a healthy relationship, of course. I think love is beautiful regardless of the color, very much so. I think that the attention to Black love, or like why it is a topic of conversation and why it is a focus specifically, is directly related to the fact that yes, once upon a time our families were broken apart. And I think what gets left out of that conversation is when you say that, people automatically go all the way back to slavery. And yes, that is something that happened. And usually the rebuttal I'll get is, well, well, from people who may not understand, the rebuttal of slavery happened a very long time ago. Very much true. I think what people are unaware of, or usually, or just not honing in on, is beyond that there were several things that still also work towards kind of breaking up the Black family. And I think I was actually reading a little bit more about this in one of my classes recently, where they were looking at how the system had worked, particularly to women who had children and were trying to get assistance from the government. And it's based upon state. This is slowly changing as well. But originally, there was this issue of if you wanted the funds, you could not actually have a man in the house. So it's this idea of either I lie on this government paperwork and say nobody else is living here, or I kick out my partner, things like that. So there are all these little nuances that kind of
made it difficult.
Right.
Made it difficult for Black men and women to come together.
Right.
So, question for you. Since you also deal with sexual dysfunction, do you need to have sex in order to have a loving Black relationship? Or a loving relationship, period, but particularly we're really focused on Black love today.
Mm-hmm. So, I would say no. And that's the... I would say that is because there is such thing as people who are asexual, and they exist in all colors and creeds, and so they can have a loving relationship just like anyone else can, and it doesn't have to include sex. If you are a sexual person, well, that's different. Then for you, sex is important. But for others, if that's not something that you need, if you are a person who's asexual but you are still romantically attracted to others, and you have a partner who's the same or has lower desire, then sure, it's perfectly fine. You don't need sex. I do think that pleasure is an important part, and you don't need to actually have sex in order to have pleasure.
All right, so outside of procreation, why do you need to have sex in a relationship?
Oh, so this is something that there was someone who recently did a study on this and came up with, I think they said around 126, upwards of 100 different reasons of why women have sex in particular.
Let's hear this.
There were so many, and I'm sure I'm not going to remember them all. Of course, one was indeed love, but it was defined a little bit differently. There was also mate guarding, like I am sleeping with you because this other person is eyeing you, and it's kind of like the more I sleep with you, the more that I have my stamp on here, so I know that you're not going to sleep with anyone else because you're getting all the stuff that I'm giving you.
That's an interesting concept. May not be true, but that's an interesting concept.
Well, may not be true, as I would most certainly highlight that, yes. But the idea of thinking that is the case.
I'm putting my mark on you.
Right. The idea probably doesn't happen in practice.
Is that a healthy thing to do?
Oh, no. Mostly because
it's like you're mine. You're mine. It's kind of an ownership in there.
Right. I would say it's unhealthy because there's no guarantee that will indeed work.
That's true.
Your partner not cheating has... Oh, this is a two-parter here. So, yes, it is true that people don't cheat spontaneously. There's usually something else going on as to why that happens. Now, it could be a part of something that is also going on in the relationship, or it could just be that person themselves is going through something very difficult and just couldn't express that to the partner, which would still be something in the relationship, but wouldn't really be on the onerous of the partner. So while that is true, that there may be a relational aspect that is added to or contributed to the person cheating, cheating is and will always be that person's choice. So you can sleep with them 6 ways from Sunday. You can do all types of tricks and things. But if they have chosen to cheat, that was their choice, and nothing you could do would stop them from doing that, even if you slept with them this morning while they were on their way out to go do it.
All right. So back to outside of procreation, why is sex essential, or is sex essential to a relationship, or why do we need sex in a relationship?
So, and I actually pulled up her study because there were so many different things, and I want to make sure that I'm getting a few of them. But the biggest one that I hear, particularly in my practice, is connection.
Connection, that's a good one. Yes. Yes.
You can connect through so many different ways. So there's your absent-minded touch, which there was another study that highlighted absent-minded touch as a indicator of love that had been long-lasting, or rather, not even an indicator, but in looking at couples that had been together or married and happy for quite some time, a lot of them had absent-minded touch, which not sexual in any sort of way. It was just, you know how you may be sitting with your partner and they'll just kind of just stroke your hair, or just put their hand on their knee, and if you were to ask them why they did that, they're just like, that's absent-minded touch. It's just generally, I just felt like being near, I just wanted to touch you. I think other people have also noted something called skin hunger, which again is just, I want that from you.
Right. I think you're right. There's a level of intimacy that you have when you're sexual with someone, because they're not, even for someone who has a lot of sex, relatively speaking, they're going to be relatively low number of how many people actually see you as a sexual being. You really truly experience that. And so for those that you do have that type of relationship with, there is a connection that's unlike any other connection you might have with someone elsewhere, or any other type of relationship.
Right. And you bring up the good point of, in a relationship, in the context of I really care about this person, sex can be a really big connecting factor. And it can be a way of showing how much I care about this person, or it can just be another way to get closer to this person, because quite literally, you are close. But it also doesn't always have to be that way. It is very dependent upon the relationship with the person. So you could be sleeping with someone and I am loving this person, and therefore for you, this act is a matter of connection. But very much it could be for other people just pleasure, where I'm doing this simply because I enjoy doing this. Some other reasons that this woman found, or the researcher found, I think her name was Cindy, I believe, I forgot her last name, there was one in particular that I thought was just so interesting, and that one wasn't mate guarding. Obligation was one.
Obligation.
I am supposed to have sex with you because I'm your partner, so I'm going to do this.
That sounds like a female thing. It doesn't sound like a male thing.
Yeah, so hers was only women.
Okay.
This study was just 100 or so reasons why women have sex. And yes, ironically, I think that's even more interesting that women find it to be an obligation in some circumstances, of course, while men do not. Interesting. When looking at sexual dysfunction, what I found, or what I've noticed, both sexes seem to struggle with, I want to do this well or right or perfect.
Well or right or perfect.
Oh, so
those are loaded.
much.
Those are loaded goals.
And there is no right
implies
way.
There's a standard. Yeah.
There's no right way. What I found is interesting, though, is for men in particular, when it comes to sexual dysfunction for them, all of it has to deal with anxiety, and it's hard to kind of explain how they're different. But so for men, when I'm chatting with them and it's some sort of sexual function, it's this idea of basically I'm supposed to be this superhuman sexual being.
Right, and size is always a critical
Oh my
thing.
goodness, yes.
Right.
Size, I'm supposed to be able to have sex on command. I'm supposed to be able to have sex as long as physically possible. And that is just unrealistic. Like, you are a human being. You most certainly can have sex whenever you want to, but that doesn't mean that it should be on command of my partner walks by and I'm supposed to be up and ready. That's not actually something to aspire to. Most certainly can it work that way? Yes. And that's simply because research will show that men can be a little bit more visual. So it's one of those, I see something sexy, I'm getting turned on, and I am able to have sex at this particular moment. Yes, that is kind of that way for men. It's different for women. Some research has shown that actually for women, instead of it being this, I can be affected by sexual stimuli and just go on, it can. It doesn't have to be that I have a desire to do this. It's I'm chatting with you and then something sexy happens and then I'm with this. And with guys, it doesn't always have to be that someone is coming to me sexually or someone is making advances or someone has done something or there is some sort of sexual stimuli. It could be I just have that desire or there is sexual stimuli. For women, it seems like it's most of the time there's kind of sexually neutral and then there's a sexual stimuli and I'm either into it and that kind of starts the cycle.
Or with women, particularly women after they've had children or have young children, that obligation comes into it, you know. I could go without, but I feel like I need to because he wants to, you know, and I'm doing it to satisfy him, whereas I'm really tired. I wish we could just get this over with.
And I think that brings up this other point of why on earth is it the obligation for him? Where is your pleasure?
I don't know if women expect to have pleasure.
Oh, they don't. Research would show that a lot of the time they don't. Or rather, I take that back. Research with people who are experiencing sexual dysfunction, particularly female orgasmic disorder, and this is something that's super interesting. You'll notice in a lot of, or not even, I think it may be all of them, when you're looking at your DSM and you're looking at your sexual dysfunctions, there is always this disclaimer, this piece in there that says it has to have marked distress. It has to cause the person distress. So if you are, what they would say is, if you don't desire sex, if you have low arousal, but you're cool with that, then I wouldn't diagnose you as somebody who has a disorder, because yes, it exists, but you don't think it's a problem. You're not distressed by this at all. What we've seen, or what some research has pulled out in studying some people with female orgasmic disorder, is they are not distressed. So these are people who aren't gonna, I wouldn't diagnose them, and I'm assuming other clinicians wouldn't either, and yet, if you exclude the fact that they aren't distressed about it, everything else would be textbook female orgasmic disorder. People who have never experienced an orgasm, whether it be through masturbation or actual intercourse, and they're cool with it.
So why don't you tell us what the different types of sexual dysfunctions are for a female?
Oh goodness, there's quite a few. In fact, I brought my book just to make sure I didn't skip any.
Okay.
So female orgasmic disorder is definitely one that is, I wouldn't say it's probably my favorite to work with. And that's mostly because it is also one that, well, they all deal with anxiety, but that particular one, there have been some people who have started really concrete things to assist. So there's, I think it's called O School, or the O. But basically they were researchers who also realized that a lot of women were not actually orgasming when they were having sex.
So when I speak to women, there's usually a distinction made between orgasm with vaginal penetration versus orgasm with clitoral stimulation.
Mm-hmm.
Most women that I speak with will say that they will orgasm with clitoral stimulation,
Mm-hmm.
but a lot will say they don't if it's just penetration.
Which makes sense. So I think that's the other thing. I think we've been sold this dream through the media and through like kind of just how people talk about this, music. Literally every facet of our culture says that you guys have sex, both people come, it's great, that's the end. That's not actually what usually happens. And so how, and I'd actually love to hear from you about this. So for sex therapists, there's always been this kind of, well, not even back and forth, but this idea of, is it a clitoral orgasm or is it a vaginal orgasm? And who was it? I want to say Freud, but I think I only want to say that because I know that he said so many things that were wrong. But someone had actually come out in a very long time ago, of course, said that the vaginal orgasm is actually second. Or is actually the primary one. This is the one that you should aspire to, and if you're having a clitoral orgasm, you're doing it wrong, poo-poo. Of course, very long time ago. But some people have actually proposed that vaginal orgasms and clitoral orgasms are the same. And the argument to be made from that is that you're stimulating the outside or the clitoral hood, but the clitoris actually is basically shaped like a wishbone. And so when you do have a vaginal orgasm and everything is kind of spasming or tightening, is it really that you are stimulating something else that is in the vaginal canal, or as you're having sex, are you just kind of stimulating the clitoral bulb or the clitoral legs here? And if that's the case, then aren't they just one and the same? Aren't they the same orgasm? So that's a big argument as well. Most women actually orgasm through clitoral stimulation, which also makes sense, because if you think about the most sensitive place on a man's penis, it would be the head, and for women it would be the clitoris, which, if you go all the way back developmentally, they're made up of the same cells. So it makes sense that you would, in order to actually orgasm, you'd have to be touching your clitoris. And in fact, there was a study by somebody who was a feminist scholar who took women who had female orgasmic disorder, but a particular form. So it's not that they could not orgasm at all. It was it was situational. So I can orgasm alone, but I can never orgasm with a partner. So what this researcher did was, okay, if you know how to orgasm alone, you know all the things that turn you on and get you there, what I'd like you to do is incorporate that with your partner. So then they worked on teaching the partner how to do all the tips and tricks that they did when they were alone, and at the end of the study they found that all of those people were able to actually orgasm with their partner.
That's very interesting, because that implies that there was some sort of inhibition earlier, and that they lost it through this, sharing what it takes. And once the inhibition was lost, they were able to experience an orgasm. And it kind of gets back to what we talked about earlier. Reason for having sex outside of procreation is just for the sheer pleasure. It should feel good. But there isn't a definition of what that should look like, meaning it has to be this or it's not adequate, So
Right.
Each woman or each couple gets to decide what their sexual life will look like, understanding that pleasure for me may look different than for another woman,
Right.
And so I think we need a freeing up of what's right,
Right.
And what it takes to satisfy a person, understanding that we bring a lot of that baggage and preconceptions into the relationships, If I'm a woman, I'm supposed to be this way. If he's a man, he's supposed to be this way. Whereas a better choice might be to just give each one the freedom to explore their sexuality and what feels good.
That is the hallmark of what you should do. I often tell people that you guys define the rules of your relationship and the regulations of your relationship, because you guys are the two people in it. So you get to say that this is what feels good. You get to say that this isn't what feels good. You get to say that this is what I'm allowed to do. This is what I'm not allowed to do, or my partner's not allowed to do. You make the rules. It's your relationship. I think it's the word you use, inhibition, is perfect for that, because another thing that I often find is women usually aren't saying what they need during sex a lot. And what I'm finding is it's the idea of him being able to figure out my equipment is too much. Like, yes, I know how to make me orgasm, but it takes a lot of twists and turns, or you have to rub this spot this particular way, and maybe it'll take too long, and then he'll either get bored, or I'm gonna freak out because I'm taking too long, and I'm sure he wants me to finish. And so it's this, oh, that just seems like a hassle, I just won't.
Any thoughts about vibrators?
Not particularly. I'm very much a proponent of, if it's good to you, use it. Some people are very much big proponents of vibrators or dildos or sexual aids. Some people poo-poo them, and they're like, I definitely don't want to do that. I'm very much in the pleasure center. So if it's good for you and you're okay with it, and if it's something that you're doing within your relationship and your partner's okay with it, have at it.
Do you think that it can desensitize the clitoris if you use it too much?
Oh, that's a good one. I have always wondered about that one, but to be transparent, I'm not sure.
Okay. What about things that happen to young girls and women along the way, like sexual abuse or incest? Does that have an impact on their ability to be sexual beings?
It can. So I want to preface this with, it's not everyone. Most certainly some people can move through this and be able to have a perfectly fine, healthy sex life and not seek counseling or anything. Some people most certainly can. I won't say that that doesn't exist. However, I would say for the vast majority of people, I would strongly encourage them to seek some sort of counseling or therapy to process the trauma. If for no other reason, sexual trauma is trauma nonetheless, and I would give that same advice to any other person, because trauma has a sneaky way of showing up in places that you didn't think it would show up. Small things can trigger you that you did not know would trigger you. So there's a possibility that you're moving through life and you thought that I'm over this and this is fine, but then you may be having a sexual experience and this person does something that is dead on what your perpetrator did, and it takes you right back there, and you were unaware that it would do that. So it can influence it in negative ways, in that it may just show up and kind of cause a block between you and your partner, or just take you back to that really traumatic moment. Either way it goes, that's really harmful to you.
Would you advise it for a woman who is fully functional, highly functional in every other aspect of her life except sexually? Meaning she's a badass in everything. She's working a great job, she has friends, she has a social life, but when it comes to that sexual piece, it's absent. Does that woman need counseling? Does that woman need therapy?
So my main proponent is, it's very dependent upon the person. So I would say yes, from the outside looking in. You should probably talk with someone if All other aspects of life are great, but the sexual component is not. But I think I would want more information. Like, particularly, is that sexual component absent because of the previous trauma and you've decided I just don't want to go there? Or is it absent because I'm afraid to go there?
I don't even know if one would know. That probably takes a lot of introspection. It's like, why bother? Everything else is fine.
Yeah, see, that's a fine line. So I say that it's a fine line because for me, I operate from the position of the client as the expert in their own life. So I will tell clients when you come in, I went to school for this, so I have all the books or the degrees on relationships, but I will never know you, your body, or your relationship the way that you do. So you guys are the experts in your own life. And I will come to you and say, this is what I think you should do, or rather, this is what I think may be helpful for you. Or this is what I think is happening. What do you think? Do you see what I see? Does this make sense to you? Does it fit your experience? But if someone comes to me and they say, well, this is happening, but I don't really think that it's a big deal. Okay, fine. However, usually my tell is, or the only time I push someone is if they're repeating it. So if you say it's not a problem, okay, fine, but did you notice that you mentioned it to me 6 times since we sat down? Why does it keep coming up if it's not a problem? And then we'll move forward, because sometimes people will say things are not a problem, but if you keep repeating it, that means I haven't pushed you, it's crossed your mind several times, and for something to not be an issue, if it's still on your mind, it's actually an issue, and now that actually makes me think that perhaps you're just avoiding it. It's an issue, it's just too big to face, or I don't want to face it, or I don't want it to be an issue, but it's there.
Right. And we hear about sexless marriages.
Oh, yes.
Which is an interesting thing, meaning we started out hot and heavy, and along the way, sex got dropped. And so that's a really interesting, and I'm not talking about a situation where one partner is ill and just not physically capable of engaging in sexual activity, but 2 normal, healthy, functioning people, and they have sexless marriages. What do you think happens there?
So, I think people look at relationships in this idealistic view, and again, probably due to like movies and media, and culturally, and it's just this idea that people get married and they love each other, and it's just this, like it's this straight line, this linear thing of we loved once we got married, this is what it's going to be. We're always going to love each other. We're always going to have sex this particular way. It's just going to be great, and we're going to ride off into the sunset. But in real life, that doesn't happen. Things wax, things wane, just like every other part of life. So I think what happens, though, is when people get settled, when things wax and wane, you have to then tune in. So a relationship, just like everything else, and including the sexual part, is something that you have to be aware of and put work into. So if you guys have been together for several years, and things, they kind of get automated, and that's natural. If you think about it, if you were to try and to remember and like cognitively or consciously do everything every day all the time, you'd max yourself out. You'd be pooped. Like, we're chatting right now, but you're not telling yourself to like breathe. You're just doing it. Your body naturally automates things. That way it doesn't have to like consciously do them. It naturally settles into things and it becomes routine. And routine actually is really safe. So on one hand, it is serving this purpose of my relationship is super safe. I know exactly what I'm going to do. I know when I'm going to do it. My partner understands this. We fit together. Great. Wonderful. It's satisfying all of that safety that you need in the relationship. However, sometimes that cannot be sexy.
We spoke for well over an hour and didn't have enough time to talk about all the things that we wanted to talk about, such as how does society shape our concepts of sexuality? And what about that song, WAP? There's so much more to discuss. We're going to have a part 2. and we're going to call it Nasty Girls. Stay tuned.